Welcome to Sleepy History Nights, a place where history isn't read, but felt. Tonight, we journey into the heart of darkness in Europe, to a land where the line between man and myth was forever blurred, and a name was carved into the mist of time. Vlad Dracula. Close your eyes. Let the shadows of history guide your thoughts, and drift slowly into the distance. Beyond the Carpathian Mountains, there once lived a prince whose name still whispers through the ages. A man whose deed erased the border between legend and nightmare. In this quiet journey, we walk gently through the lands of Wallachia to hear how power, betrayal, and blood shaped the fate of a prince, and how, even after centuries, his shadow still lingers. So, rest easy and let the story begin. But remember, not every shadow fades with dawn, and some names, like Vlad, never truly fall asleep. It was the 15th century, an age when Europe lay like a blood-stained chessboard. Kings and popes, each moving their pieces in a deadly game. And in the east, the Ottoman Empire, like an endless tide, devoured lands and fortresses one after another. Bulgaria, Serbia, Bosnia, and their eyes were fixed upon Constantinople. But in the very heart of this great battlefield, there lay a small land, Wallachia, a realm between mountains and rivers, a narrow bridge between two worlds. Every ruler who took his throne had to choose between the cross and the crescent. And sometimes, that choice demanded their life. Amid this storm of empires, Vlad II, ruler of Wallachia, rose to power. He was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a knightly brotherhood sworn to defend Christendom. His cloak bore the sigil of the dragon, and so the name Dracul, the dragon, became his. But the symbol that once stood for honor became his chain. To survive, he paid tribute to the Ottomans, and at the same time pledged allegiance to Hungary to avoid a dagger from behind. Two powers, each pulling his soul apart, each seeing him as nothing more than a pawn in their vast and ruthless game. His every decision was written in blood. At times, Ottoman soldiers camped at his gates, and at others, Hungarian envoys threatened war. And within this darkness, his family, his sons, stood as sacrifices to politics. And in the heart of that storm, a child was born. A child whose name would one day whisper through time like a cold blade in the wind. No one yet knew that he would become an eternal nightmare. But history, silent and patient, was already weaving the threads of fate. And in the dimly lit halls of Castle Dracul, a decision was made, one that would change everything. Now, let the fires of Wallachia burn once more. The night wind swept over the Carpathian Mountains. But inside the halls of Castle Dracul, silence reigned. Candles flickered faintly, their light trembling against the cold stone walls. Shadows danced across the chambers, and in their midst, Vlad II, a man caught between two worlds, between the cross and the crescent, leaned over a wooden table, his eyes weary and dark. Outside, the sound of armor echoed faintly through the courtyard. But within, there was a louder sound still, the whisper of destiny. That night, a decision was made, one that would change the fate of a family forever. Two young sons, Vlad and Radu, were to embark on a journey neither chosen nor promised to end in return. The Ottoman Empire was rising, its power spreading closer and closer to Wallachia. Sultan Murad II demanded not only tribute, but a living guarantee of the prince's loyalty. That guarantee was his sons. In the politics of the Middle Ages, sending children as hostages was nothing unusual. But for a father, it was a wound upon the soul. Vlad II knew if he refused, the Ottoman armies would crush his walls. And if he accepted, his sons would fall into the hands of his greatest enemy. It was no choice at all, only necessity. And so, in the year 1442, Vlad III, a boy of about 11, and his younger brother Radu, barely 7 or 8, left Wallachia in a small caravan, bound for the Ottoman court. The road was long and weary. They passed through the green valleys of Wallachia, crossed the Danube River, and slowly entered a world that smelled of the East. Their destination, Edirne, the Ottoman capital before the fall of Constantinople. Here the empire displayed all its grandeur. Everything was different. Marble palaces, janissary soldiers in crimson robes, stone walls engraved with Arabic scripts, and tall minarets echoing the call to prayer. In the crowded streets of Edirne, a market pulsed like the beating heart of an empire. Caravans arrived from east and west, bringing not only goods, but languages and cultures as well. If you listened closely, you could hear them all intertwine. Turkish and Greek, Arabic and Persian, Armenian, Slavic, and tongues unknown. This endless hum, like a tide rising from every corner of the world, overwhelmed the two Wallachian children. Everything was foreign and frightening. They were not guests. They were not princes. They were hostages. Life in the Ottoman court shaped them in two very different ways. Radu, younger and gentler, slowly adapted to his new life. He learned the Turkish language, wore Eastern garments, and even found friendship among the Ottoman princes, including a young Mehmed, the boy who would one day conquer Constantinople. But Vlad was of a different spirit. He looked upon his surroundings with cold pride. He despised the foreign tongue and the foreign faith. He obeyed reluctantly, laughed rarely, and was punished often for his defiance. In the eyes of his captors, there was already a spark of fury, one that would one day ignite into something far greater. During those years of captivity, something was born inside him. Hatred. And yet, learning. From the very enemy he despised, he learned the ways of war and the art of rule. He wielded the sword, mastered the Turkish tongue, and witnessed the iron discipline of the Ottoman army. This experience became a wound that would never heal, and a wound that never heals can become a weapon. Within the golden halls of Edirne, the two brothers began to drift apart, one calm and compliant, the other fierce and unyielding. Radu smiled among the princes of the empire, while Vlad, with dark eyes and a heavy mind, whispered to himself each night, "One day, I will return." History turned its pages slowly, and those pages were stained with blood and betrayal. A young prince in captivity was becoming the monster the world would one day know by another name. The nights of Wallachia had grown heavy. The sky was restless and gray, and the earth whispered with betrayal. In the castle of Targoviste, Vlad II, father of the house of Dracul, sat among trembling candles, knowing that the shadows were closing in. The wind passed through the dark forests outside, the same forests that years later would be known as the Forest of the Impaled. But that night, there was no fear of enemies, only the fear of friends. Within the stone halls, silent footsteps echoed. The boyars, the great nobles of Wallachia, had lost their faith in their prince. They saw him as a man who bowed to the Ottomans, yet smiled at the Hungarians, a man whose loyalties seemed to shift with every passing season. And that doubt had shaken his throne. By the year 1447, everything came to a head. John Hunyadi, the mighty commander of Hungary, marched into Wallachia with a powerful army. The traitorous boyars opened the gates for him. Vlad Dracul was trapped. He could raise no army, for the same people who should have defended him no longer believed in him. And the Ottomans, who had once taken his sons as guarantees, did nothing to save him. The Dragon Prince stood alone. In a brief and bloody clash, his army was defeated. The stories of his death vary. Some say he was slain in battle, others that he was captured and executed by Hunyadi's order. But all agree on one thing. Vlad II Dracul fell in the year 1447. Yet an even darker fate awaited his eldest son Mircea. The rightful heir was betrayed by the boyars, captured, and blinded. They buried him alive in the cold earth. That moment, that horror, would haunt Vlad for the rest of his life. From that wound grew an eternal hatred for the boyars of Wallachia. With the death of his father and brother, the throne of Wallachia stood empty. But power never remains unclaimed. The Ottomans saw their chance. They placed 16-year-old Vlad III, still a hostage in Edirne, upon the throne as a puppet prince. Hungary, in turn, crowned another Vlad, Vladislav II, supported by the boyars and by Hunyadi himself. Vlad III's rule, backed by Ottoman might, lasted only a few short months. The Hungarian forces crushed him, and he fled back to the Ottomans. It was his first taste of defeat. But from that defeat, the seed of iron resolve was sown. Vlad learned that a crown is not granted by noble favor, nor by the promises of foreign kings, but taken by the sword. Years passed. Vlad wandered between the Ottomans and the Hungarians, sometimes as an exile, sometimes as an ally, but always with one thought burning inside him: to return. Then came the year 1456. John Hunyadi, the same man who had destroyed his family, fell in battle against the Ottomans. And Vladislav II, his rival, was caught in the chaos that followed. Vlad seized the moment. With a small force and the backing of the Ottomans, he returned to Wallachia. And this time, he took the crown with blood and steel. But his greatest enemies were not the Hungarians, nor the Ottomans. They were the boyars, the very men who had betrayed his father, and buried his brother alive. The morning mist lay heavy over the castle of Dargoviste. Down in the narrow streets, people bowed their heads in silence, their faces filled with both fear and reverence. Whispers drifted through the air. The prince has returned. Vlad sits upon the throne once more. But this Vlad was no longer the boy once held in Edirne. He had become a man, harder than stone, and more scarred than the knights of the Carpathians. He had seen betrayal with his own eyes. He had buried his father and brother in blood-soaked earth. And now he had returned, with a single vow burning in his heart. No act of treachery will ever go unpunished. When Vlad III regained power in 1456, he knew that the throne of Wallachia could not stand without order and fear. He rebuilt the taxes, tightened control over the Danube trade routes, and demanded more from the peasants to restore his rule. But his true enemies were the boyars, the nobles, who sold their loyalty like coin and had led his father to ruin. He invited the boyars and their families to a grand Easter feast. Music and laughter filled the stone hall. But behind Vlad's cold eyes, a storm was waiting. Suddenly, the doors were sealed. Soldiers burst inside. The boyars were taken captive, some executed on the spot, others forced to march for miles toward the fortress of Poenari. There, among the mountain cliffs, they were made to rebuild the fortress with their own bleeding hands. Many died of hunger and disease. No one was safe. Vlad ruled through terror. To him, fear was stronger than love, and far more loyal than trust. Wallachia was divided between order and horror. Crime almost vanished. It is said he placed a golden cup in the town square, and no one dared to steal it. But such order came at a price: heavy taxes, forced labor, and a silence born not of respect, but of fear. Many cursed his name in secret, yet praised it aloud. Wallachia became a land where justice was written in blood, and safety was bought with pain. The years of Vlad's second reign carved his name into history, a ruler who spared no enemy and trusted no one. With every dawn, the sun rose over fortresses built from bone and blood, and within them sat a prince who believed only terror could hold a crown. But on the horizon, a greater storm was forming, and soon, even fear itself would begin to tremble. Vlad, after years of blood and betrayal, at last saw his crown more secure than ever before. The boyars were subdued, and the peasants, though afraid, knew that his reign was an age of order and command. But power, like a bitter wine, made him bolder. In the year 1461, Vlad refused to pay tribute to the Ottoman Empire, and that single act lit the fire of war. Soon after, the Sultan's envoys arrived at his court. By custom, they did not remove their tall hats. Vlad smiled and ordered their hats to be nailed to their skulls. News of this insult reached Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople. Not long after, blood ran across the borders. In a harsh winter, Vlad rode deep into Ottoman lands and slaughtered thousands. Enraged, Mehmed gathered a vast army in Edirne. Soon, the Sultan's forces, like an endless sea, advanced toward the borders of Wallachia. Vlad knew that in open battle, He could never match such power. So he chose the path of shadows. In the summer of 1462, with only a few thousand riders, he struck the Ottoman camp in the dead of night. Fire swept through the tents, swords flashed in the darkness, and his target was clear: the Sultan's own tent. Vlad came within only a few steps of Mehmed himself, before the guards closed in. Even so, the Ottoman army burned in chaos until dawn. Days later, when the Sultan reached Targovishte, he beheld a sight born of hell: a vast plain filled with corpses and stakes, more than 20,000 men impaled, prisoners, soldiers, even the merchants of passing caravans. Carrion birds circled above, and the wind carried a cold wail through the forest of the dead. Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople, looked upon the horror and said, "How can one conquer a land whose ruler does this?" But the Prince of Wallachia did not yet see the war as over. He turned his land into a weapon. Villages were burned, wells poisoned with the bodies of the dead. The people fled to the mountains, and the Ottoman army, starving and sick, found itself trapped in a scorched land. At last, the Sultan ordered a retreat. Vlad had won, but his country was left in fire and ruin. That summer, Wallachia became a living nightmare. A prince who ruled through fire and fear had brought the conqueror of Constantinople to his knees. Yet in the shadows, betrayal was already waiting. The summer winds filled the plains of Wallachia with ash and shadow. The war with the Ottomans had left a deep scar upon the land and its people. And when exhaustion weighed upon every soul, a new banner rose from the horizon: the banner of Radu, the brother raised within the Ottoman court. The weary nobles joined him one by one, and Vlad, the prince who ruled with stake and fire, was left alone. At Panari Castle, news of the siege arrived. The Ottoman banners darkened the valley, and Radu's flag waved below the cliffs. Vlad's wife, a young woman with sorrowful eyes, climbed the tall tower. In her gaze there was no surrender, no hope, only a bitter choice: to fall into the hands of the enemy, or to fall into the arms of death. She stood upon the high wall, the wind whipping her hair across her face. Below her, the river Argesh gleamed like silver in the depths. And in one silent moment, she gave herself to the wind. Some said the river carried her body away, others that she was shattered upon the rocks, her scream echoing through the mountains. But all agreed on one truth: that day, Vlad's love fell, and the castle that once held his hope became a tomb of memory. With a heart full of grief and fury, Vlad withdrew from Wallachia and rode toward Transylvania, seeking aid from King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary. He believed the Christians would call him a hero, the prince who stood against the Ottoman tide. But politics knows no loyalty. In Buda, his enemies spread forged letters, claiming Vlad had conspired with the Turks. And the king, once a possible ally, ordered him in chains. The prince who had once made the Sultan's armies tremble was now a prisoner in the stone cells of Visegrad. Years passed in confinement. The damp walls heard only his whispers. Rumors claimed he was still cruel, that he killed even the birds, and could not forgive the darkness within him. Yet letters from those years remain, written to the nobles of Transylvania, where he called himself a defender of the Christian faith and begged for a chance to reclaim his throne. So which image is true? Vlad the monster, or the prince who, even in chains, saw himself as the shield of Europe? Whatever the truth, the prison never broke his spirit. It only hid the fire within, waiting for the day he would rise again. Cold autumn winds whispered softly through the valleys of the Carpathians. Fate still wandered, like a restless ghost, through the shadows of Wallachia. After years of defeat and long captivity, Vlad remained a prisoner in the heart of Hungary. Meanwhile, his younger brother, Radu, with the blessing of Sultan Mehmed II, rose to take the throne. Radu had spent his youth in the courts of the Ottomans. His face was gentler, his manner calm, obedient, eager to please the Sultan. But Wallachia, fierce and untamed, was never a land that bowed easily. The boyars never truly trusted him. Rebellions smoldered across the land, and his rule never took root. Years passed, until around 1475, perhaps 76, when Radu's story quietly ended. Some say in exile and illness, others in battle. History does not agree, but one truth remains clear. With his death, the throne of Wallachia fell silent once more. And far away, in Hungary, King Matthias Corvinus began to wonder if the prisoner he had long kept in chains might yet serve a purpose, for the shadow of the Ottoman Empire still loomed heavy over the Balkans. Slowly, the harshness of Vlad's captivity began to fade. The damp walls of Visegrad gave way to a noble chamber in the city of Buda. In this quiet exile, Vlad found an unlikely peace. He married a woman of royal blood, perhaps the sister or cousin of the king himself. That union changed everything. Vlad was free once more, and bound now to the noble blood of Hungary. After more than a decade behind stone walls, he returned to the world. With a small, determined army, he set out toward his homeland, a return like the flicker of a dying candle, glowing faintly against the dark. But his final reign was brief. The land he had sown with blood and fear no longer welcomed him. His end is shrouded in mystery. Some say he fell in battle against the Ottomans near Bucharest. Others whisper he was betrayed and struck down by the very boyars who once served him. There is even a tale that his own men mistook him for the enemy and killed him in the dark. The stories differ, but one truth endures. His death, like his life, was wrapped in shadow and fear. No one ever found his body, and so his grave, like his name, drifted into legend. Now that the flames of the story have faded, and the shadows of Vlad, the Prince of Wallachia, dissolve into the mist of time, let us rest for a moment. History is like a river, calm and endless. At times it runs red with blood, at others clear as morning light. Yet always it flows. Each generation writes upon its waves, and in time names and legends drift away, like autumn leaves upon the water. Vlad was but one of those leaves. He came, he fought, he spread fear, and in the end, like all men, he returned to the earth. But memory saves stories from death. Reality and myth intertwine, and a name once spoken in terror still echoes softly in the night. Such is the cycle of history. From blood to legend, from horror to lullaby, from scream to silence. So close your eyes gently, and remember, even the darkest shadows will one day fade into the light. What remains is not the sword, nor the crown, but only the memory held within the human heart. Rest now, for history still writes on, and tomorrow another chapter will begin.